Then there was this one time, I can only imagine that like what was building up leading to this, because she, I don't think, remembers entirely, and I surely don't, especially because all the drugs, in terms of like me analyzing what's inside of her head. But you know what? It's gonna be another story time day. I'm gonna talk about relationships today, specifically my personal experience in monogamous long-term relationships. Ooh, buddy, where are we gonna start this? On the edge of the first one, the edge of the latter half of the first serious relationship I was in. I'm not gonna get into details. I'm not gonna name drop. Just provide more so like a little bit of background context for the second relationship, because it was kind of a twisted situation. If you watch my other video where I'm talking about the reason I started the channel, and I go into like sort of my testimonial in terms of getting out the streets, getting clean off of dope, and actually deciding to change my life and do something with it as a result of discovering that I was going to have a son. You can watch that video. I'll link it in somewhere. It'll be linked. But it relates to that time period, before that time period, but also during and thereafter, actually all the way up to now. You guys will see sort of what I mean. And if you actually watch that other video already, then you already have some sort of information, or some of you watching will probably already know a lot of the situation anyways, just because you were in my life during some of these time periods. So the first relationship I was in, I think I entered the relationship to begin with based purely off of insecurity and a lack of confidence in myself that I could do any better. And so as a result, the relationship, it started off like any, I think, normal relationship would start off. As a teenager, you have the sort of excitement level of having somebody who's actually reciprocating interest in you, and you're going out and you're having fun together, spending time together, developing an attachment. And I experienced eventually, after I think it was like 2 years, if I'm not mistaken, total from front to back, that experience lasted. But it ended like crazy. It ended all crazy. And by the time I got into the second relationship, I had concluded at that point that I didn't think that the first one actually facilitated or was representative of genuine love. I think it was more of attachment, like toxic or unhealthy attachment and infatuation. But the second one, the contrast between the two is why I say that I don't think the first one was love. But it's crazy because the second one was the best friend of the first one. Second one, I don't mind to, she's still in my life. It's my son's mother, Ree. We'll just call her Ree. It's her nickname anyway. And if you know, you know. Otherwise, don't worry about it. But so I was selling, using, doing all kinds of crazy things. And I think latter 2016, so the first relationship, it went on for 2 years initially. We split, and then I was messing around with some other females, seeing some other people. I had started to apply myself more. I also went through some other specific health conditions, and like went through this whole roller coaster of a phase with my health that impacted my self-perception and stuff significantly. And it impacted the way that I interacted in these dynamics. But then eventually, after spending some time, enough time to re-ground myself insofar as that was actually possible in the state of mind that I was in at the time, I ended up being contacted by the first one, Miss No Name, again, and she wanted to get back together. And again, because of my self-perception and mindset, I completely jumped back into that head first and disregarded everything that had happened in the past, which was, it consisted of obviously me being super toxic, controlling, and narcissistic, and her cheating on me with my best friend at the time, or friend at the time. And this is just some teenage drama type stuff because we were literally teenagers. But she cheated on me, not like sexual intercourse or anything, but was making out with bro in the parking lot of the hospital when they both come to see me when I was hospitalized. That was sort of the dynamic, and it was back and forth like that. And her justification was because I was controlling and narcissistic, which was true, because I was super insecure and, all the problems that I just, that were aforementioned just now. So that's sort of the summary of that. Fast forward some time as adults, when we get back into this relationship after it had been cut off for, I don't know the time frame that it was cut off or how long exactly, but I know that I was older, I was an adult, I had definitely changed in a lot of ways, but not in like the character or mindset. Even though I had gotten older, learned more things, picked up on more things, started experiencing new things, doing things that I hadn't done before, especially in terms of drugs. I branched out a lot more on that front, crime in general. I'm not going to dig into that a whole lot, but we got together, and then that specific part, the drugs, the crime, and all that started unraveling even further when we did get back together. We were staying in several different places over time, but she was staying in apartments in some projects, and I moved in with her and her mother at the time, and then her mom moved out to go stay with some dude she met, and so we had the apartment to ourselves. And then we ended up getting, I think, we went to stay with her mom after a while, and then also got a different place of our own, and I turned it into a whole trap, little trailer. It was honestly cute. I would describe it as cute looking back on it. Not in like any sort of good way, but just like, oh, some goofy shit. Like, what was I even doing or thinking? We were in this point in the story or the narrative, let's say, she had started hanging out with her friend again, who is Ree, the mother of my son now. And previously, the reason that this is interesting is because previously, the first time when we were teenagers together, Ree's friend, who I was actually with in 2016 at this time, the first time that we were together as teenagers, Ree had come over to hang out with her, and I didn't really know Ree like that. We had hung out and stuff, and I actually met Ree before I ever met the other one. But she did not like short dudes, obviously shorter than Ree is, and ultimately passed me off to her friend, basically. And then that's when all that even started in the first place. But she come back over to hang out, and because of my insecurities and controlling issues and all that stuff, I had freaked out and was like making an issue out of them hanging out because Ree didn't want me to hang out, or somebody. It was probably actually the other one who didn't want me to, but it was just telling me it was Ree that didn't want me to, so she could escape. Which, in hindsight, I don't blame her, because I wouldn't want my daughter to be with somebody like me the way I was at that time, and I wouldn't want to be with a female who was like I was at that time. No way. So again, completely understand that. But nonetheless, that was the case, and I ended up geeking out, man, like screaming and cussing and threatening and getting violent, throwing stuff like it was crazy. I literally being crazy. They probably would have. She genuinely thought I was a psychopath. Was like Googling the side effects and behavioral indicators and stuff like this, and showing the other one and everything. That is, she's the one was Googling this stuff. Again, we didn't really even know each other at the time. But then, like I said, this what I'm talking about now happened the first time when we were teenagers, like before adulthood or anything like that. And then fast forward back to 2016, where we all three were starting to hang out again. This is when things really start to take a turn in the story, because they are like childhood, all through their life had been best friends. And so it was a normal thing for them. It was just like a reunion for them to click up and start hanging out again after we had run into each other. Me and the other female ran into Ree at a fall festival, as a matter of fact. And after that specific encounter, we ended up hanging out again and everything. I remember Ree looked at me crazy because her friend, which they weren't friends at the time, because of me, actually, in large part, at the fall festival, when they encountered each other again, the girl I was with, Miss No Name, I'm going to just call her Emmy. We'll just call her Emmy. Told her that I was doing acid and stuff because I was tripping that day on acid. And or no, I was either tripping that day or I had just tripped the night before. I can't remember. And if I had just tripped the night before, then I was probably still on it. So I think I was still tripping at the festival, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, she ended up coming over to the trailer after that encounter at the festival, and it's a bunch of little insignificant details at first, but then the more we started hanging out, at first it was like friendly, like it was just on a friendly level. There was a baseline of trust, as in things are not entirely the same as they used to be, which they weren't in significant ways. I was still the same in very specific, significant ways, but it was also completely different than the first time when I told you I was a teenager and we weren't even adults yet, and I was a psychopath. I was still a psychopath, just it was more concealed, and I had it under a little bit more control in certain environments. And plus, I was more exposed to drugs, the streets, and everything else in terms of empirically in it, and as opposed to just witnessing it or being around it. And so I introduced her to things like acid, LSD specifically, MDMA, the brown crystalline Molly, and all kinds of different stuff. We used to party a lot on the things that I would get to use and to sell. And like I said, this is like 2016, probably like mid to later is how long it ended up lasting. But then there was this one time, I can only imagine that like what was building up leading to this, because she, I don't think, remembers entirely, and I surely don't, but especially because all the drugs, in terms of like me analyzing what's inside of her head. But you listen to any other stories I tell on this channel, that'll especially around this time period, you'll probably hear Foothills mentioned a lot. But this was this specific time we went up there in her car, Emmy's car. I'll laugh every time I say that. But we went up there in Emmy's car, and I was sitting in the back seat, the middle of the back seat, not buckled up or anything, like just literally in between where the front console is. And we had Ree over here and M over here in the driver's seat, and we were all candy flipping, which basically, for the uninitiated, that just means you're rolling on Molly and tripping on LSD at the same time. And that's what we were doing. We were on like, I think 3 points of Molly, and it was probably just a hit, just a tab of LSD. It was the tongue tabs. we had sugar cubes and all kinds of different stuff over time. I don't know what specifically this time. I guess it's not even really relevant. But we were up there, and when the Molly kicked in, I'm pretty sure that was actually Ree's first time ever even doing that. And it definitely wasn't my first time. It kicks in, right? Ree and I have always had like super, super similar tastes in music. It's like, and it's actually a broad range of music that is encompassed in that when I say that. So it could range anything from the early 2000s and some of the 90s R&B and hip hop, the like Usher all the way to Alicia Keys and like just Jagged Edge, like Tyrese. There's a lot of and plus it could also branch into country. It could like from different eras, different time periods of music, and then plus just the straight trap shit, like the hood shit. So stuff. Sorry, I said I was gonna try to start catching myself with the cussing a little bit. We have super similar tastes in music. Plus, Ree, unlike M at the time, super intelligent, super conscious, really different than anybody I ever knew in my life at that point in my life. I had never known anybody like her, and the person she was at that time, since I first met her all the way up to that time, and then a long time after that until the damages from she and I being in a relationship, which I'll get to here shortly. Up until that, those damages were done by our relationship together, she was literally the most beautiful soul I had ever met in my life, unlike anybody else in my life I had ever met. And I'll get to how and why, but I absolutely corrupted her. And it was halfway consciously, but I wasn't even self-conscious or a cognizant person. So it was also halfway unconscious, even though a lot of my actions were intentional with intentional purposes that I subsequently did achieve. We were all hanging out. We had this experience in the car where we were candy flipping, and it was her first time doing Molly on 3 points. If you know, you know, but your first time on 3 points at the pure crystalline MDMA, the brown, starts rolling, and I forget which specific songs, but there were multiple songs. I know there was a Chris Brown song. It was one of the slow ones, one of the ones where you could just like turn all the lights off and go deep on some, I don't know how explicit YouTube will let me get on here without checking me for being crazy explicit. So I'm going to limit the sexual, suggestive type of stuff. Although it's an integral part of the entire thing, I will try to like limit the descriptive elements of it. But I remember touching like her shoulder and stuff, and we made like small little physical contacts subliminally where M in the driver's seat right next to Reed didn't even know, had no idea that this was even going on. Now, keep in mind, I'm not justifying any of this. You know, there's been a lot of things that have been discussed and resolved and things. So I don't look back at it with such a depressive mindset, and I am able to laugh at it, even though I am a large part of why things went so wrong for like multiple people aside from simply myself. I frankly don't find any of it funny in terms of like I was a very terrible human being for such a long time, genuinely. But nonetheless, it happened, and it wasn't just the touching. So the touching is what really amplified everything because of the MDMA. However, we both felt that. We both felt the energy. And Ree and I are having this complete experience that is in a totally separate world than M is even included in. She's candy flipping too, but we're like literally in our own world over here, but able to still play it off to where like M had no idea about any of this, like right next to her in the car. And that energy, that connection was a hallmark component of our entire foundation of what turned into our relations, what turned into relationship, what turned into her now being the mother of my son and my friend. So that energy was the establishment really of us in that regard. After that experience, I know she, obviously at this point I know, but I knew at that point that she was not just going to be able to forget it. And there was no way that I could just forget it because of, especially once, I became sober the next day before doing my daily dose of drugs. When I wake up, it's like you have that realization of what actually just happened and who it just happened with, and like the dynamics and how everything came about. It was crazy. It was like something out of a movie almost. Actually, a lot of my memories that I have, I could actually say the same thing about, as a matter of fact. But it really was. It genuinely was. Eventually, over time, I don't remember how soon after that happening it was addressed between Ree and I. But I do remember specifically and emphatically after that specific experience, I started my seduction, let's say. I wasn't aware that that's what I was doing at the time. I wasn't even aware of like really what seduction truly was, or, I wasn't consciously trying to manipulate even though like I was intentionally trying to. Okay, so this is a complicated thing to try to explain. I was consciously manipulating and seducing. Some ways were good ways and some ways were not so good. For example, the drugs, that was a terrible idea. But other ways, making someone feel good about themselves and being open and vulnerable about certain parts of yourself, especially if as a man towards a woman, those are both seductive. Also, introducing somebody to drugs that screws up their dopamine and makes them feel the way that drugs make you feel is also in its own right, in its own way, going to be seductive. So that's what I mean when I say that. But I was implementing both. However, the caveat, and this is why I say it's a little bit complicated, is because, again, I wasn't cognizant. I wasn't self-aware. I wasn't conscious. So I'm not doing this stuff with like, yes, I'm manipulating, I'm seducing you, I'm going to bend you to my will. It was more so I experienced this overwhelming feeling that never left me after the night of that experience in the car and Foothills. And so I was essentially acting in ways that seemed intuitive to get her to see me in the same way that I was rapidly seeing her. And because I knew that foundation was there, because the experience in the car and the energy and the fact that she never said nothing to him the next day about it, and the energy didn't shift, that means that told me subconsciously that she felt that too. And eventually it was addressed and discussed and everything. And, I think we were both probably nervous about it a little bit. And there was the excitement, thrill / anxiety of the whole cheating situation. Me, because I was technically in a relationship with him at the time, and that was her best friend, and her because it was her best friend. And yes, it was grimy, absolutely. Because I know if you're not thinking that, then well, I would question that. It is what it is, but it's how it happened. Over time, things started developing further and further. between Ree and I. And this goes on, I don't even know for sure how long exactly, but she started paying attention to me in new light and got to know a particular depth and side of my essence, of who I am as a person. And I obviously opened that part of me up to her so she could see that, because I knew that the way that she was now looking at me, coupled with that, I didn't cognitively know this, but intuitively it felt like the right thing to do in order for the attraction and the energy between us to strengthen, which was my goal on an instinctive level, because I really liked her. And plus, Em and I were not happy. She had already acknowledged everything from the past and actually she didn't even acknowledge that she was wrong about that and really actually try to do anything to address the things that she did wrong until she found out about Ree and I. But even still, she was, it was kind of messed up because, and I'm going to like skip ahead a little bit before I come back and finish moving forward with the story. Around the time where she ended up finding out about everything before Ree and I actually got into our relationship, she essentially like started acting like a servant to me, trying to make up for the things she did in the past. And that's exactly the behavior that I continued to facilitate. But I also did that in a manipulative way as well, because I made her feel like she had to keep doing that in order to satisfy me, let's say, or for me to forgive her, let's say. And at the same time, knowing within myself that it's literally not going to change anything, but that it just makes dealing with her and all the bad stuff that came with her easier. All the while, I was a very significant reason of even why she did a lot of the bad things she did when we were first together. Because at the end of the day, even though she did certain things that, like, for example, just the one example of making out with my best friend, whom I thought was my best friend at the time, in the parking lot while I'm literally laid up in the hospital, stuff like that compounded over time. Dudes that other friends that I have at her house in the bed that we slept in while I'm like having to stay inpatient in the hospital, and all kinds of stuff like this, intentionally trying to make me feel jealous and stuff because she was also insecure, and it made her feel good whenever I felt jealous. But then I would always take it too far, and then it would cause other problems. Granted, even granting those things that she did that like pushed me over the edge, at the same time, looking back on everything, like teenager or not, or if we're looking at the latter half of the time that we tried it the second time, man, premature, young dude, like 19, 18 or not, the irrespective of the age or whatever, like it's my responsibility to handle my own emotions and manage myself psychologically. It's not up to somebody else to check how they come at me or treat me or something. Like, yes, obviously you need to check yourself when it comes to having respect for people and things like this in general, be a civilized person, a human being. But if somebody does you wrong, the answer is not to like amplify it and do them worse. That's a very immature thing to do. And that's exactly what I did. And I had no self-control. It was even more messed up for me to facilitate the behaviors that she was showing in that latter half of right before I got with Ree and left her officially, then it would have been just off the ethics of the scenario in itself. Because again, I'm supposed to be in control of my own responses to the world and the people and stimuli there within. So that was a whole moral issue unto itself. Reset it back to where we are having these experiences. I'm in my process of seducing instinctively. We're both enjoying ourselves, plus, the thrill of getting caught. While it was anxiety inducing in one respect, less so for me, because I think I, at this point, just did not care anymore at all and was deeply unsatisfied in the relationship. I mean, I was literally driving up other females before Ree started hanging out with us over there. Even before the encounter at the festival, I was driving other females, kicking it with other females in her car all over the place while I was selling, just out wilding, doing stuff that I had no business doing. I should have just, left the relationship if I was going to be that way. But I wasn't mature, and I definitely, I didn't have these thought processes back then. And then under no circumstances is this type of behavior or ethical conduct acceptable at all whatsoever. So during this process of push-pull, seductive excitement, eventually we started having experiential openings where we were able to actually have physical intimacy. The very first time it ever happened between Ree and I, M went to work that day, and I told her I was going to drop her off and use the car to go hit plays, because that's what I did anyways. I didn't have my own car at the time. I had no interest or intention to even get my own car at the time, because I had other places that I would rather spend my money. Foolishly, but it is what it is. It was what it was. We dropped her off at work. Then Ree and I came back to the trap house, trailer, whatever. And, first we went, I don't remember if we went to the hot spot first. So wherever we were the very first time anything at all happened was in the car itself. And then after some foreplay in the car, things got really heated. It resulted in me driving us back to the trailer to then go in the trailer and actually, take things further. I'll never forget the way she was sitting in the passenger seat with her hair all messed up, ruffled up, looking at me. God, man. I'll never forget that. But anyways, we get back to the trailer, cut all the lights off. We didn't want to get anything on the couch or anything like that. Plus, I think she had brought some lube. And so we threw I don't remember if it was a mattress or if it was cushions and pillows and stuff, but we ended up on the floor. No, actually there was some oral and foreplay on the couch, and then we ended up on the floor. Anyways, at some point we were on the floor laying down with each other, and then somebody stops by for a play, straight up opens the door, which was commonplace for certain people. And this certain person, Brooklyn, walks in the door, turns around, walks right back out the door. And then, things get wrapped up, handle that whole little situation, and things like that of that nature progressed over time. And then at some point we ended up having our little, a place that we would drive to, ducked off in some bushes on a back road that we called the hot spot. And that's where we would go to, on the hood, on the trunk, in the car with the doors open, with the doors shut, like savages in the wild. There was even one time, this was like actually in like way, way later than this, because these specific times were like toward the front half of us, even the first time after we had sex, in the trailer. And that's when these experiences and most of the hotspot experiences were. But then eventually there were times where we would whip her car out while she's posted up at her mom's house, and it cold outside too. Like we were literally both unstable because it would be cold outside to the point where you need a jacket on. And we're out here laying coats and stuff on gravel of some random person's driveway in the middle of Cosby, I think, and out there like doggy style on top of a jacket in a gravel driveway behind a car that is literally just posted up at the edge of some random person's driveway. Literally, like, just thinking about this right now is crazy. It's just wild, man. Like, what the hell? Like, you gotta have something say. But again, we were on drugs. I wasn't conscious. She had never done drugs or anything before. She has had a very solid, has had a very solid family support, and through her mom especially and her stepdad. She's had people who have really guided her through her life and cultivated her character, which is why she was such uniquely beautiful soul and why I fell in love with her so fast. And again, unlike literally anybody, not just around me or in that city, but that I've ever known in my life. Save her mom, obviously, but I didn't get to know her mom until even years after that, because even once we got together later on, which I'll get into a little bit here shortly, I was reclusive because of my mental state. I still wasn't okay. Things had started going sour between us and our relationship, and I would just hibernate in the upstairs bedroom, and like even dinner time, whenever her mom would cook or grab dinner or something, I would like show myself just enough to not feel guilty from being disrespectful because she had cooked or something like that, because she is a equally beautiful soul. But so like we didn't even develop any sort of connection or bond of any kind until way later. So we have these experiences, and then we'll fast forward some because it's a bunch of back and forth of a lot of similar situations. And December comes of 2016, headed into 2017, I think. Yeah, for sure. 12/28/16. I'm pretty sure was our first anniversary. That's when we actually officially got together, was December 28th of 2016. Leading up to this date, still in December, there was a series of events, conversations, etc. that took place that led to this happening. What this consisted of, just to summarize, was coming clean to Emmy about it, being honest with her and saying, look, this is the situation. I don't know what their conversation verbatim consisted of. I'm not saying this to get into the details of that, but rather just to highlight the point. She had to have that talk with her and be like, look, this is what's up. And she also, and this is exactly what I mean, because she was seduced into falling in love with me, and she acknowledged the entire time the issues, ethically speaking, that she had with it, even in the process of engaging in this whole path down this whole road with me, which largely was like her human nature and psychological buttons were being pushed in all the perfect, precise, right ways to facilitate and stimulate the responses and behavior that everything resulted in. And the ultimate result of all of that, again, like I just said a minute ago, was that we both fell in love with each other. And I think I was in love with her before she actually felt that way about me. And then I think once I opened up to her about how I felt, that probably did even more to make her feel the same. And plus, when everything's new and fresh, the butterflies and excitement are still there. So yeah, it's very easy to also blend those and to not be able to tell them apart, especially if it's your first time feeling anything like that. And so I had experienced a level of it with the other person, her friend, and and we had conversations at some points like, did you feel the same about her and all this other stuff? Because I was her first love. That is both of theirs, actually. But I was the first person that really loved. And I didn't think at the time, I didn't think she was the first person because I thought that I did the first time I was with him. But then the further Ree and I developed in terms of our connection and emotional attachment, save the attachment levels, which led to a lot of complications in the relationship that ended up being a part of what destroyed everything insofar as it got destroyed when it got destroyed. I hadn't experienced any level of love like I ended up experiencing with her, which is why to this day, years later, she has my son and we're friends. I trust her more than almost anybody to this day. Probably especially because of our history. And because I know she's really held it down and stayed silent and stayed solid in a lot of ways, a lot of scenarios, including way later whenever we had already split up and got back together a whole bunch of different times, and then start just associating with each other on like a friends with benefits level right before finding out she was pregnant, because that's how that ended up happening. And I spoke very briefly on that in the other video that I referenced at the beginning of this one. That is also the channel trailer I've got posted up that you can go check it out after this video if you haven't watched it yet. She has the talk with Emmy. I'm rolling around with Day Day at the time when they're having this talk. As a matter of fact, I was rolling. I took M's car and I went and scooped up Day Day. I think might have been a play or something. I don't know. I forget specifically what I was doing, what we were doing, but I went and scooped up Day Day, like in NP, for context, to the ones who know. But yeah, I scooped up Day Day, gave them their time to talk or whatever. Then we met back up at that Walgreens by the train tracks and got back in the car, and I was anxious to hear before I derailed the conversation on a side note. She was in love with me, but did not want to end everything with me. That's probably like the last thing that she wanted to do, but her morals in the end, because she realized after a certain point of us going down the road we were going down, especially developing feelings like that, because there was a lot that happened in between that ended up being the catalyst of why those feelings got established. Like a lot of things that actually, even to this day, I still value in a very particular way, even though I'm not the best at opening up about my emotions and stuff like this. Like I can communicate them. I don't hold them in or anything anymore. But even to this day, I'm not the type of person that generally in conversation is just going to like be open about all the things that I feel and think on a personal private level like that, unless it's prompted. And I'm an open book. I don't mind sharing. It's just I'm not the type of person to naturally offer up that information just out of nowhere freely, just because I feel it, even if I feel it deeply and sincerely. Get back together, like literally physically together, and are talking about the result of their conversation. And I go that night back to Ree's house with her, and we decide that we are going to be in a relationship. And I know she had to be internal. Excuse me. Obviously, I know to some standard degree that she was internally conflicted as it is because of her morals competing with her emotions and her spirit. But then also there's probably a level of that just because of the type of person she is and the depth of her consciousness. Even then, it was probably on a level that I will never even be able to relate to entirely. But we were also still both elated at the fact that it was actually going to be a possibility, because right there towards the edge, the latter half of this journey we were on together under or behind closed doors, let's say, even though the only person that I wasn't even really trying to hide it. So I don't know how, like if it was me in M's position, I probably would have picked up at least on more than she did, but that, I guess that's neither here nor there. So we end up back eventually at her mom's house living together. I moved in, brought the bare minimum with me. There was a little buffer period before that officially happened that consisted of a few things, but some of that I'm a little fuzzy on. But we moved in together, and then we were happy in a relationship together for a minute. I'm not positive on the time frame of precisely how long that would have lasted. Over time, gradually, as the freshness of the excitement of being able to be together started to wane, and things began to where they would have otherwise, like, the waters would have calmed and things would have just been standard, casual, and whatever they would have been in a healthy relationship. My jealousy started to reemerge. The excitement was gone. My energy and attention that was spent solely towards her, overlooking anything that could have possibly made me jealous during the process of trying to win her, both consciously and subconsciously. Like, again, in hindsight, looking back at it, both consciously and subconsciously, all of my energy and efforts were directed towards wanting her to feel, for me, the same way that I felt for her, and not knowing exactly what it's going to lead to or what's going to happen or how anything could happen, but just knowing that I couldn't give up or abandon, I couldn't give up on or abandon the pursuit that I was on, because it meant so much to me on so many different levels, not least because, again, she was like a beacon of light in a world of complete and utter darkness. Over time, we were in our relationship. My jealousy started to manifest, as I was saying before. My jealousy, which led to, so let's actually trace it to the roots here, because now, then obviously I couldn't acknowledge it because I wasn't cognizant of it or wasn't self-aware of these things. I just knew I feel bad. I don't want to feel bad. Surface level thinking, how can I not feel bad? Well, this would make me feel better. Okay, so I want this. Oh, there's this blocking me from having this, which is the only thing that I can see that's going to make me feel better. And that was like a fixation issue I had psychologically, which has been characteristic my entire life. Maybe it's the bipolar. I don't know if there is actually some sort of clinical reason for that, for the fixation, but I've actually been able to turn that into a beneficial thing nowadays. Like in my life now, I'm able to turn that into more of a positive and flip it on its head. But I wasn't even cognizant of this at this time that I'm talking about right now. So that's really like the root of everything, and the insecurity is the foundation of it there, which, you know, and we could trace that even further and get into childhood, get into experiences and traumas and stuff like that. But that's unnecessary, because like the implications are the same and it's pretty obvious. Like, and a lot of people, actually more people than I think ever before, are experiencing like mental health issues and trauma and different stuff like this. It's just become more of a normality in all of society collectively, especially in Western culture. I'm not going to get into the socioeconomic or political discussions around these things, but now that I think about it, I probably should make some videos like that, because I have a lot of thoughts and opinions surrounding that. Now, again, this is Ree's first love. This is her first real relationship. The closest thing she had prior were like two experiences. The first is when she was like a whole lot younger. I think she was 16, something like that, 14 to 16, with another guy. I'm not gonna name drop the two guys' names out of just general decency, because I feel like it's kind of a female thing to do anyways. But there were two guys. One of them was, again, when she was like literal pre-teenage girl, and the other one was somebody who was technically an ex-boyfriend during the time, had just become an ex-boyfriend during the time that our whole experience together when I was with him started actually manifesting initially, and then that whole process. She actually used him as an anchor point to shield against him finding out what was going on, by talking about him in certain ways and acting like they were still, you know. But yeah, anyway, so these behaviors in me started to manifest. She was good person, like did not prompt any of what she got out of me. She did not do anything to me to deserve the things that she got from me. And still, even in all of my insecurity, jealousy, those two things combining together with other psychological stuff and non-cognizance I had to basically form this controlling dynamic, which, again, this is a reoccurring theme all the way up until after I changed the controlling thing, and like there was a series of epiphanies that happened over the process of being with Cherie initially all the way up to now. The epiphanies that I've had over the years, which have been too many to count, each one with a significant awakening and bundle of lessons baked into it. They were all downstream from having Cherie and her family in my life, which, again, that's like another never had people like this in my life before. It was always toxic people who were very much unhealthy themselves, physically, psychologically, whatever, but primarily psychologically. And it was all I ever knew. And so I'm learning new things during these epiphanies, but each one also did a lot of damage on our relationship. And then eventually it got so bad on my end, and she was like, you know, trying to do what she thought was right. She would even give in to a lot of things and compromise a lot of things that not only did she not want to a lot of times, but that she shouldn't have had to in the relationship because of my insecurity and control issues. Even though she actually acquiesced on these things, it wasn't the thing that was actually going to make the relationship better as I thought in my one-track mind of thinking at the time it was going to, because it made it worse, because it carried with it resentment because of the reluctance to accept or to submit, let's say, to the things that I was requesting of her, which were completely, some of it was like reasonable, obviously, but then at the same time, how is she to discern what's genuinely reasonable of my requests when there are equally absurd requests at the same time that I'm also, trying to get out of her? And again, it's her first real relationship, first time experiencing love. She has no idea really what she's doing. She's opened up to somebody more than she's ever revealed herself to anyone in her entire life, on levels that are so deep that they would have been otherwise unfathomable. So it's no wonder that the damage that was happening, because I literally in this whole process took a beautiful spirit and stomped on it until it became cynical. Now, that's obviously not a slight. That's not me saying like, I ruined you and now I ruined her and now she's just some bad person. Like, obviously that would be ridiculous to say that. But I did I corrupted her essence, because, even being an adult after a period technically, and being intelligent as she has always been, as conscious and conscientious and driven and real, authentic, and beautiful inside and out, and just a good person, compassionate, empathetic, really genuinely cares about seeing people in a good place in life in general. That was altered. It hasn't necessarily changed, not at least not in every way. A lot of ways that has been changed even to this day, and I think still a large part because of the past regarding she and I specifically. But the innocence factor that was sort of the foundation for those things, some of those things, particularly the innocent aspect of her soul essence, of the, let's say, internal beauty that I keep referencing in this respect. It was corrupted over time by me through these types of things. She finally got the advice from another one of her family members, who I also have a lot of respect for, because of the way that I know that she values his opinion, values his input, the lessons that he's taught her practically about life, about dealing with people like me and the people I've only ever known throughout my life, that gave her real life wisdom that even now to this day has proved invaluable to her development, and was certainly invaluable to her being able to overcome me whenever I needed to be overcame in that relationship. So yeah, she got the insight, the counsel, if you will, that she needed to officially say, hey, can't do this. This is not changed. I can't do it anymore. First time we officially broke up. Here's where things plummeted deeper than they had at all ever to this point. She initiated the split in a hospital, going to see M, like her friend that I used to be with previously, they were talking on a casual friend level again, and her mom was in the hospital at the time, and Ree and I rode with her to go see her mom in the hospital. While we were there, because Ree and I had already had all these problems in our relationship going on at this point, she finally gathered the courage to address the situation and talk to me about it and look, I don't know this is what I want anymore. I can't do this, etc., etc. Immediately, I go into depressive mode internally, and not knowing how to process it, not knowing how to deal with my own emotions and overwhelming feelings and stuff. I already didn't, but now this on top of it, the only deeply good thing that provided me comfort was a big factor of it too, because I absolutely would do anything I could to just have some sort of level of consistent comfort, because I was my entire life, I pretty much never felt like I've had 100% just comfort or security. And so that's something like a spirit that has been attached to me almost my entire life, of just not feeling safe ever. Always having this lingering paranoia, like my entire life is going to be upended at any given moment's notice. And also like a subconscious fear that I'm not going to be able to recognize it in time to be able to respond. And I say subconscious because obviously, even if I would have been able to recognize something like that, I would have had no idea how to respond or how to even think about figuring out how to respond. So, I'm in the bathroom of the hospital here processing this, and the way in which I handled this situation foolishly was to, that same night when we got back, remain in the vehicle with Emmy when Ree went back into her mom's house, which is also where I was living at the time. So we were together. Even though we were about to split that night, I was still welcome to live there, and that's been also a consistent thing. Anytime that I have lived there, whether Ree and I have been together or not, they've welcomed me with open arms as if I was part of the family, even when I could tell that they had disdain for me because of me in terms of my relationship or my the way in which I existed and behaved as a part of Ree's life. And that, as a mom or as a parent, you don't want to see your child in pain. And if it's over something like a relationship or something like that, where their deepest part of their emotional soul is connected to somebody who is literally destroying it, I can't imagine empirically necessarily what that's like from a parental standpoint. My son's only about to be 4 in October. So, I can't relate to that, but I can conceptualize of it now, and it had to be difficult. And so for them to welcome me in nonetheless is amazing, and something that I'll always have so much respect and love for from her family because of these things like this. But the way I responded to how I felt as a consequence of her essentially breaking up with me, even though if I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure that she was just talking about taking a break, but I interpreted it as breaking up, partially because of the relationship with him way before. And then just in general, that's how I thought about that because of programming that it's literally just my perspective at the time. Chose to stay out in the car with Emmy. We ended up making out in the vehicle right outside of the house. I justified it morally within myself through the line of reasoning of, well, she just said we're not together anyways, so it's technically not cheating. Like a complete, I'm going to cuss this one time, but piece of shit, frankly. And it gets worse because we ended up, I told Ree that I was going to go riding and smoke some and just chill and ease my nerves with him, because we both felt heavy because of the breakup at the time in that night. And she told me later, when we've discussed this to resolve things and communicated about, she's told me that she had an intuitive feeling like something wasn't right with it. And I mean, indeed, she was correct. What ended up happening is I went back to M's house with her, which she was staying with her mom and her mom's boyfriend at the time. I went back with her and we ended up sleeping together that night, and I stayed overnight and ended up falling asleep in the same bed with nothing but my boxers on. And apparently Ree had been trying to get a hold of me the entire night. Also was apparently planning on wanting to get back in a relationship. Basically would have signaled that like she just needed time to think it over while, you know, not being in a relationship with me, in order to realize whether she wanted to be in the relationship or not, which, I mean, especially with the dynamic of the way our relationship was going at the time, my controlling habits because of my insecurities and stuff, I could see why that would be suffocating, and you would need some damn space to step back and be like, do I even want this? Is this even worth it? She, Ree that is, walks into the house, opens the bedroom door, looks directly at me, laying next to him, wearing nothing but my boxers, not even a blanket over me, responds in the way that she responds and goes back out to her car. I immediately jumped up and rushed out there. We talked for a minute, and that situation was really like the first super significant thing that served to be the catalyst of like the overall destruction of us and any hope for having the same connection that we had spent so much time and energy building. That's not to say that like I don't think you could ever reach a point to where there's just no turning back if both parties are equally invested and genuinely care about repairing things to get to a place that is not the same as before and certainly not worse, but that is better for both of you than it ever has been. And just to apply that generally, that is true in any relationship. It doesn't matter what has been done in the relationship, which for the record is the point of marriage. I think it's because, like Peterson says, you're giving another person a vow that's saying, I'm going to reveal my full and true self to you and all of my monstrosity, and you're going to do the same. And the vow is that we're not going to run from each other regardless of what we show each other. Meaning if she shot me with a gun, if after that I healed up and didn't die, even if I was put in a wheelchair and paralyzed from the waist down as a consequence, even after something like that, if both of us would have been mutually willing to the same degree to rebuild and recultivate a bond and relationship and trust, new trust, then it would have been possible. It would be possible. Regardless, again, and that's why I used an extreme example, because that's, I think, a truism for, again, anybody, any two people who, like I said, meet the criteria of being equally invested both emotionally and willing to put in the effort and have the patience to get through all of the thick things that are going to have to be sorted out as a consequence of whatever damage has been done. And the worse the damage has been, more demanding that task actually is. I mean, logically, even just logically makes sense. There are a lot of other things that happened after that point in the process of us splitting, getting back together on like not platonic, but friends with benefits. We were messing around. The sexual activity was better for each of us respectively with each other than with anybody else. And so that was a consistent recurrence throughout our entire knowing each other, almost ever since the first time we had sex. And so there was a lot of that happened, and then there were more catalysts. We split and didn't talk at all for several months, I think, during 2018. And during this time in 2018, I think I had went back to M, her former best friend, so to speak. We had got back together, but the relationship that we had at that point was not even necessarily like it wasn't I would barely call it a relationship. It was more like like we provide each other with a level of comfort and just genuine companionship, because neither of us have friends. Neither of us want any other friends. And it's just comfortable and familiar, right? Familiarity being the key reason that it's comfortable. And so, you know, she was working, I was doing my little hustle thing, making our money, spending our money, doing fun stuff, getting sauced, faded every single day. A regular part of like what I mentioned in that other video. And my life took several different twists and turns during that period, and I ended up at some point getting into the studio, which was also a patchy thing all throughout my latter teenage into adult years, is in and out of the studio to record and create music. And so it was the second half of October of 2018 when we spoke to each other on the phone for the first time, and I literally don't know how long it had been. And it was on a friend level, and the pain and all the negativity wasn't as fresh on either of our minds, although it was acknowledged just by talking to the other person, at least on a inner thought or subconscious level. I'm at the studio. I'm preparing to go on a trip to Washington, D.C. to go to the club and see Scar-Lord in concert and, you know, go have fun and do my thing. One thing led to another with just general keeping in touch, text messaging and stuff like this. And we ended up linking up to have sex in her Cadillac outside the studio for the first time in a long time. And after that happened, we had a talk and decided that we wanted to keep that specific element going, and gave our reasons for why. And it did keep going. And this is pretty much how things have been recycling a specific type of pattern that's happened over and over and over again, just with different details and different information. So picture the behavior and the relationship dynamic as an archetype that is repeated multiple times throughout our life, all the way up until the birth of our son. And then things started getting a little trickier and different in specific ways and more complex, obviously, with a child in the mix now. But also got off drugs, and that was like one of the last significant epiphanies out of all the ones that I've had. That was one of the most significant later ones, if we're basing before and after on, you know, before and after my drug usage and being in and out the streets and, you know, everything that come behind that. It's just looked different in different ways though. And still, most of the time with each of those archetypal relationship dynamic resets, let's say, there always ended up being yet another piece of damage to tack on in the process. That repeated even after my son was born, even after our son Asias was born. It just manifests in even more different ways at this point. And I'm also starting to slowly wake up a little bit. I still wouldn't call myself cognizant immediately. It was a process. Plus I quit everything cold turkey, so I had to detox when I decided that the last thing I did was the last thing I did, and flushed what I had, got rid of my stuff. Over time, I've done that multiple times, actually. I've even when it comes to cigarettes. But anyways, fast forward, we go through a little rough patch with the custody situation with our boy. Really, like, we both had to go to court. We still have the whole child support situation sorted through. I send child support regularly. There's the court stuff. occasionally I have to pop up and talk to people at court and stuff like that. But yeah, so the court process, basically all it consisted of was that Jackson obviously is equally mine as he is hers. I signed the birth certificate, so I have all rights that a father is granted. But I think that, and especially, to her defense and position, even more so, especially looking back on it now, the postpartum, first of all, is no joke, man. Postpartum is no joke. And I still wasn't fully emotionally intelligent enough to handle myself given what was coming, because, it was already bad enough in terms of when things got bad between she and I. And you sprinkle in postpartum on top of that, it was intense, to say the least. What the court situation over Jackson, or Isaias, ended up looking like is almost seemed like she wanted to know or was afraid whether I genuinely cared about our son or not. I think she had a fear, and obviously that's like, she would tell you that wouldn't be a rational fear to have now. But at the time, you've got things going bad between us. I'm still not fully where I need to be psychologically, or where I should be in the position of a father psychologically, though I had already started putting in a lot of work and have been perpetually doing so in a compounding manner ever since I found out she was pregnant. It still took some time because I was starting from an extreme deficit. So I think that her fear was, even in any sort of irrationality that might have been, it was still somewhat of a reasonable position, it from the perspective of new maternal instincts, postpartum depression, and trauma induced by me for years, and seeing some of the darkest things that she's seen in her life as a result of me. So, and on top of that, factoring in the fact that she was in love with me for the majority of that was even more to the point of intensity. It's just like, damn. I saw that as her trying to keep him from me and use him as a tool to hang over my head, to get at me, or get back at me, or out of spite, things like this. That's how I viewed that, because you're keeping my kid from me. How else am I supposed to say, look, I just want to see him. You want to start with visitations until you can, you feel comfortable and the trust level there. That's fine with me. We can compromise on that. I just want my son to be in my life. All where my line of reasoning was at the time, for the record, just to clarify. But it's like, I'm a new father. I've changed my entire life, and I'm trying to completely revolutionize not only who I am as a person, but also everything about me and my life. And now the one thing that actually gave me new life, that gave me the will to even want to live whenever I was expecting to die for so long and had accepted it and just basically was like, screw it, and didn't really care to go out of my way to try to live, which eventually consisted in me changing. But my line of reasoning was my son, not metaphorically, not just emphatically because of the overjoy or emotion that I feel or felt as a father to my son, but literally, he saved my life. I'd probably be shot and killed, overdosed somewhere, or some sort of health event as a consequence or a side effect of a drug or something that I was doing, or some combination that. I genuinely believe that something would have happened to me if I wouldn't have found out that she was pregnant with him. And so, and I had conveyed that to her before. So my line of reasoning was all of these things, and it didn't like register with me why she couldn't accept that, or why she couldn't understand that, and why she refused to acknowledge that that was the truth, and then not listen to anything I say, and then just turn around and believe the same thing. Do you actually care to the point to where you're really taking me to court? But here's how this little piece got resolved, because once I was literally me, and me of all people, if you know me, then you know, like, me going to court to initiate anything is like, like, what, who are you type stuff. Excuse me. Trying to catch myself when I do that. If you catch me cussing where I didn't catch myself, type it in the comments with the timestamp, please. But yeah, so we ended up resolving that in the parking lot with her mom as a moderator for the discussion, to make sure that things didn't turn into a nuclear explosion or something like that. And we were able to sort it out. I started out getting, I think it was one night or a weekend visitations with him. And prior to this, save the time that where I was actually in the home around when he was still infancy, and like taking care of him in there, whenever I moved out, and obviously went out on my own, then that wasn't the case anymore, and that's when this stuff specifically started happening. Yeah, like I said, it started off with just the visitation things, alternating, and then over time, between the fact that she saw me step completely out of character to go out of my way, even having the criminal record I had and everything, to go to court just to make sure that I'm able to be a father to my kid. I think that, well, not just think, because she's told me, she's acknowledged this to me as part of the reason why I've just adopted it into my memories of this entire situation. But that showed her specifically that, oh, he actually does care about his son, and this is not just some weird thing to try to like go to war with me type thing. But then there was the question of his safety, and is he actually going to be taken care of when he comes there, whether or not you love him? And that was another series of proving grounds, let's say. And, I think I resented that whole process and her whole mindset about that a little bit. I've been unable to hold resentment because, especially since I quit drugs, it's difficult for me to stay mad at somebody. Even if I get mad to the point to where like I could murder the person and feel zero emotion about it, I would still not hold a grudge against that person, regardless of what happened after I've calmed down. After I've calmed down and, short enough or enough time has passed, which is typically not that much time, maybe probably a week or so at most, typically, depending on the situation, the person. But she would probably be the longest because she knows just the right ways to get to me that nobody else does. And my son pretty much being that in that way. Not to say that everything she did in any decisions like this was based on that, though some of them maybe, some of them not. I don't know. I don't know which was what. I tend not to really concern myself with it too much nowadays because we literally have an equal amount of time between the two of us. We literally alternate weeks. It's her week, and then he comes up here for a whole week, and he goes there for a whole week, and that's how it is right now. And I'm thankful for that because we are peacefully able to co-parent now, and we both trust that each other have the genuine best interest for Jax in mind with the decisions that we make, irrespective of any sort of emotions or experiences with each other that we might have, or grievances, let's say. But yeah, there was this a series of like things that felt like there was no way out of at the time that, I likened them a moment ago to proving grounds, and that's what it felt like. It felt like they were unjustified at the time, but the more over time that I started, especially when I started journaling and reading and stuff again, that stuff has helped me a lot. Like journaling specifically, the introspective type of journaling, and even just introspective meditation. Not like I say meditation because that's the word that I used for this, because it is like on multiple levels represents the accuracy of how I introspect. But I'm not talking about the refocus your breath or like train your neural circuits type of meditation. I'm talking about the meditation in terms of ruminating over thoughts and reflecting on events or your past or your character, why you are the way you are, things like this, the things that ultimately led to waking me up cognizantly, which is the thing that I never had in the past. So, and now, fast forward some more time, now we're at a place, like I said just a minute ago, where we're co-parenting. Things are peaceful. She can call me if she needs me, and I'm there. I'm sure it might be the same. Probably, like if it was actually important, I could do the same. But I tend not to. I don't bother anybody with any problems I have. Generally speaking, I just do me. I'm a grown man. Yeah, I tend to bear my own cross, but this has been the summarized, believe it or not, broad story of my experience in long-term relationships. And I think that for me, just reflecting on it outwardly to you guys in the form of like trying to keep it as a linear narrative is just that. It's me telling it as a narrative from memory purely. So I'm considering the things that I'm talking to you right now in a different light than I would be as if I were reflecting on it in private. But with that in mind, I would like to say, all else having been said up to this point, I think as a listener or a viewer, where you're not constructing it as narrative and where it's novel to you because obviously you don't know me or my life on that level, if you would engage the narrative in a reflective, contemplative manner, I think there's a lot packed into these experiences, which is why I think I ended up deciding to talk about it today, or this evening, technically this morning now. I think because me reflecting on these things, and even more so through journaling, but me reflecting through these things, is a significant portion of what has converted any lessons that I might draw from them into wisdom, because I actually lived it. Like, obviously it's my life. And so converting them into wisdom upon reflection, it gave me the insight first, like what lesson can I take out of each of these situations? And even it's better for me because I have the emotional and the visceral responses that I had to each of these things that were the negative things and the positive things in my life throughout all of everything that I've shared with you. And so having that visceral memory empirically to sort of put up against the intellectual, let's say, lessons or intelligible lessons, that is what has helped me to change. like as just a general process. And that's something that I do now, like just frequently in general. And I do a lot of other things for my mental health. Actually, that is a good idea of a video to make. I'm going to make a video at some point about the things that I do to sustain and to aid in my mental health without having to take psychiatric medications like I'm technically, was supposed to be prescribed to take according to psychiatrists and the doctors, but that I don't take, and I haven't for I don't even know how long now. I self-medicate naturally through non-medical things like meditation, like actual breath work, neural circuitry rewiring and training, learning and education, journaling, bunch of different styles of journaling that I use. I was a piece of shit. Really, truly was a piece of shit. And I think that if I can bounce back from that and get to where I'm at now with the trajectory that moving forward that I have now, I think you would amaze yourself by what you're truly capable of. That's probably going to wrap it up for this video. I would very sincerely appreciate it if you could drop a like and a subscribe. If you want to see more content surrounding things like other stories that may or may not be beneficial or at the very least entertaining in some way, but more important than those, content surrounding psychology and psychiatry and mental health, society, politics, economics, philosophy and theology, writing and reading and literature and symbolism, and pretty much anything regarding academia, or I do reaction videos to a broad range of content. I'll be uploading music, especially when I get back into the studio.